The mysterious journey begins. The wind howled through the barren landscape, carrying grains of red sand across the endless plains. A lone figure trudged through the desolation, her cloak fluttering wildly in the harsh gusts. Beside her, a small child struggled to keep pace, her tiny boots leaving faint marks in the sand that the wind quickly erased. "Are we almost there?" the child asked, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and curiosity. She clutched a small metallic object in her hand, a token of some kind, battered and scratched, yet clearly precious. The woman paused and turned to her. Her alien features, a mix of sharp angles and soft contours, bore a weariness that spoke of years of hardship. "Not yet," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "But we're getting closer." The child tilted her head, her bright eyes narrowing in thought. "Who are we looking for?" she asked, though it wasn't the first time she posed this question. The woman hesitated, her gaze shifting to the horizon. In the distance, jagged rocks jutted from the ground like broken teeth, and the faint outline of a ruined structure loomed against the dusky sky. "A human," she finally said. "Someone who changed my life." The child frowned, her small fingers tracing the edges of the token. "What did they do?" The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Memories flooded her mind, flashes of fire, screaming, and the cold realization of impending death. But then came the image of a hand, strong and human, reaching up to pull her from the chaos. "They saved me," she answered simply, "when no one else would." The child fell silent, sensing the weight of those words. They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the shifting sands. The journey was not an easy one. The land was unforgiving, with sharp rocks that tore at their boots and sudden sinkholes that threatened to swallow them whole. Strange creatures skittered in the shadows, their glowing eyes watching the travelers with predatory intent. The woman remained alert, her hand never straying far from the hilt of a blade hidden beneath her cloak. At one point, they came upon the remains of an ancient machine, half buried in the sand. The child approached it curiously, her fingers brushing against the corroded metal. "What is it?" she asked. "An old war relic," the woman replied, pulling her gently away. "From a time when humans and my people fought each other." "Why did they fight?" The woman hesitated. How could she explain centuries of conflict to a child? "They didn't understand each other," she said finally. "They thought being different made them enemies." The child looked up at her. "But you said a human saved you. If they were our enemies, why would they do that?" The woman crouched down, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. Her alien eyes softened as she looked into the child's curious gaze. "Not all humans are the same," she said, "just like not all of us are the same. There are good ones and bad ones, and this one, he was good." The child nodded slowly, though she didn't fully understand. She held the token up to the fading light, its surface reflecting the fiery hues of the setting sun. "Is this his?" she asked. "Yes," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's all I have left of him." The child stared at the token for a moment longer before slipping it back into her pocket. "We'll find him," she said with quiet determination. "We have to." The woman smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," she said, "we have to." As night began to fall, they reached the edge of the rocky outcrop they had seen earlier. The woman scanned the area, her sharp senses picking up on the faint sounds of movement. She motioned for the child to stay close, her hand tightening around the hilt of her blade. The ruins ahead were eerily silent, their crumbling walls casting long shadows in the moonlight. The woman stepped carefully, her every move calculated. She knew they weren't alone. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the air, followed by the sound of claws scraping against stone. The woman's heart raced, but her expression remained calm. She drew her blade in one swift motion, its metallic sheen catching the light. "Stay behind me," she instructed the child, her voice firm but gentle. From the shadows emerged a creature, its sleek body glinting with a metallic sheen. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and it let out another menacing growl. The woman squared her shoulders, ready to defend the child at all costs. But just as the creature lunged, the child let out a gasp. "Wait," she cried, pointing at the creature. "It's hurt." The woman hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she took a closer look. The creature's movements were unsteady, and a dark, viscous liquid dripped from a wound on its side. Lowering her blade slightly, the woman stepped forward cautiously. The creature growled again, but didn't attack. Instead, it collapsed to the ground, its chest heaving with labored breaths. The child stepped out from behind her, ignoring the woman's protest. She knelt beside the creature, her small hands reaching out to touch its injured side. The creature flinched but didn't move away. "We have to help it," the child said, looking up at the woman with pleading eyes. The woman sighed, her grip on the blade loosening. She knelt beside the child, her instincts telling her this was a risk, but one worth taking. "All right," she said, "but we need to be careful." As they worked to tend to the creature's wound, the woman couldn't help but think of the human who had once saved her in a moment of desperation. Perhaps this was fate's way of reminding her of that act of kindness. And so their journey continued, with a newfound companion and a growing sense of purpose. A flashback to the past. The desolate silence of the ruins faded into a vivid memory, as if the past had pulled her into its grasp. The alien woman, now sitting by a dying fire with the child asleep at her side, stared into the flickering flames. In her hands, she held the small token, a human dog tag. Its scratched surface caught the dim firelight, each mark a reminder of the events that changed her life forever. Years ago, during the height of the conflict between humans and her kind, she had been a soldier, a reluctant one. Her people, driven by desperation and dwindling resources, had declared war on humanity. She was young, barely trained, and thrown into a battlefield that felt more like a slaughterhouse. The memory came alive in her mind. Explosions tearing through the air, the acrid scent of burning metal and flesh, the cries of the wounded echoing around her. She remembered running through the chaos, clutching a weapon she barely knew how to use. Her squad had been ambushed, and she was alone, bloodied and terrified. Then came the moment that would haunt her forever. She had fallen, her leg pinned beneath a piece of wreckage. The battlefield stretched out before her, a grim tapestry of destruction. Smoke filled her lungs, and she could hear the heavy boots of enemy soldiers approaching. She had closed her eyes, expecting the end. But instead of a bullet or a blade, she felt hands, strong, steady hands, lifting the debris off her leg. She opened her eyes to see a human soldier kneeling beside her, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes, though sharp and alert, held no malice. "You're hurt," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Can you walk?" She stared at him in disbelief. "Why? Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he inspected her leg, tearing a strip of fabric from his own uniform to bandage the wound. "Because not all of us want this war," he finally said. "And not all of us see you as an enemy." Her people had always described humans as cruel, heartless beings who would stop at nothing to destroy them. But here he was, risking his life to save hers. The world around them seemed to blur as he lifted her to her feet, her arm slung over his shoulder for support. "We need to move," he said. "This place won't be safe for long." They limped through the battlefield together, dodging falling debris and the piercing beams of searchlights. At one point, they had to hide beneath a collapsed structure as enemy drones scanned the area. She could hear his breathing, steady and controlled, as he waited for the right moment to move. "You're different from what I was told," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant explosions. He chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Funny. I was told the same thing about you." They reached a makeshift shelter, a hidden alcove beneath a crumbled tower. He carefully set her down and checked her bandages. Despite her injury, she found herself studying him. He wasn't much older than her, and there was a weariness in his eyes that mirrored her own. "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Because killing you wouldn't solve anything," he said. "Maybe if more of us stopped trying to destroy each other, we'd actually have a chance at fixing this mess." She didn't respond, but his words stayed with her. In that brief moment of peace amid the chaos, something inside her shifted. She began to question everything she had been taught about humans, about the war, about herself. But their respite didn't last long. The sound of approaching footsteps jolted them both into action. A squad of human soldiers appeared, their weapons raised. The man stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "Stand down," one of the soldiers barked. "What are you doing with the enemy?" "She's not a threat," the man replied firmly. "She's injured. I couldn't leave her out there." His comrades looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "You know the orders," one of them said. "We don't take prisoners." The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "If you want to shoot her, you'll have to go through me." There was a tense silence. The other soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, their weapons wavering. Finally, their leader lowered his rifle with a frustrated sigh. "You're on your own with this, Carter. Don't expect us to back you up." As the soldiers disappeared into the shadows, the man, Carter, she now knew, turned back to her. "Looks like you're stuck with me," he said with a small smile. She didn't know whether to thank him or curse him. All she knew was that her life had been spared, and it was because of him. The memory faded as the fire crackled, pulling her back to the present. She looked down at the sleeping child, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. Carter's dog tag felt heavy in her hand, a reminder of the debt she owed him, a debt she intended to repay. "I'll find you," she whispered into the night, "and I'll make sure you know what you did for me." The flames flickered lower, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. Obstacles along the way. The sun rose slowly over the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The woman and the child had barely slept, their makeshift camp offering little comfort. The fire had long since burned out, leaving behind only the faint smell of ash. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges were mounting. As they packed their belongings, the child clung to the dog tag around her neck. "Will we find him today?" she asked, her voice laced with a mixture of hope and fatigue. The woman tightened the straps of her pack, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "Maybe," she replied, though her tone betrayed her doubt. "We'll have to be ready for anything." The first challenge came quickly. As they walked, the ground beneath them began to shift, the once firm sand giving way to treacherous sinkholes. The child stumbled, her small frame sinking into the loose earth. "Hold on," the woman called, dropping her pack and rushing to the child's side. She reached out, her strong hands gripping the child's wrists as she pulled her free from the collapsing ground. Panting, the child looked up at her. "What is this place?" "A graveyard," the woman said grimly. "This is where they buried the machines after the war." The child glanced around, her eyes widening as she began to notice the twisted shapes of metal jutting out from the sand. The remnants of war, broken weapons, rusted armor, and shattered drones lay scattered across the landscape, a haunting reminder of the conflict that had once raged here. "We shouldn't stay long," the woman said, her voice low. "There are things here that don't like to be disturbed." As if on cue, a low growl echoed through the air. The woman froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the blade at her side. The child huddled close to her, clutching the dog tag like a talisman. From the shadows of a nearby wreckage emerged a creature, its body sleek and metallic, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It moved with an eerie precision, its clawed limbs clicking against the ground. The woman stepped in front of the child, her blade drawn. "Stay behind me," she commanded. The creature circled them, its movements deliberate and calculating. It was a scavenger, a predator that had adapted to survive in this hostile environment. The woman knew that it was not just hunting for food. It was hunting for anything of value, and they were intruders in its territory. The standoff was tense, the air thick with the weight of unspoken danger. The woman held her ground, her eyes never leaving the creature. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at them. She reacted instantly, her blade slicing through the air with precision. The creature let out a shriek as it narrowly avoided the strike, its claws swiping at her in retaliation. The battle was swift and brutal, the woman's movements fluid and practiced. She fought not just to protect herself, but to shield the child, who watched in wide-eyed fear from the safety of a nearby crevice. Finally, with a final strike, the creature collapsed, its metallic body crumpling to the ground. The woman stood over it, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. She wiped the blade clean on her cloak before sheathing it. "Is it gone?" the child asked timidly. The woman nodded. "For now. But there may be more. We have to keep moving." They pressed on, the encounter leaving them shaken but resolute. The landscape began to change as they neared the edge of the machine graveyard. The sand gave way to rocky terrain, and the air grew colder. The woman's keen senses detected the faint scent of smoke, evidence of a nearby camp or settlement. "We might find answers there," she said, pointing toward the distant plume of smoke. "But we need to be careful. Not everyone we meet will be friendly." The child nodded, her grip on the dog tag tightening. "I trust you." As they approached the camp, they were met with wary eyes. The inhabitants were a ragtag group of survivors, humans and aliens who had banded together in the aftermath of the war. Their clothes were patched and worn, their faces lined with the hardships of survival. "What do you want?" one of the men demanded, his weapon trained on them. "We're looking for someone," the woman replied, her tone steady but cautious. "A human. He might have passed through here." The man frowned. "You'll have to be more specific. A lot of people come and go." She described the human in as much detail as she could, her words painting a vivid picture of the man who had saved her. As she spoke, the survivors exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Finally, an older woman stepped forward. "I've heard of someone like that," she said, "but he's not here anymore. If you're looking for him, you'll have to go farther north. That's where they say he disappeared." "Disappeared?" The woman's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Some say he died," the old woman replied. "Others say he left to live in peace, far away from all this." She gestured to the desolate surroundings. "If you're determined to find him, you'll need to go through the Black Ridge." The mention of the Black Ridge sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. The woman's resolve, however, only grew stronger. She thanked the old woman and prepared to leave, the child following close behind. As they walked away from the camp, the child looked up at her. "Are we really going to the Black Ridge?" "Yes," the woman said firmly. "If that's where he might be, then that's where we'll go." The obstacles they had faced so far were only the beginning. The path ahead was dangerous, but she would not stop. She owed it to him, to the man who had saved her life, and to herself. The journey was far from over, and she was ready for whatever came next. A dangerous alliance. The Black Ridge loomed in the distance, its jagged peaks shrouded in dark clouds. The air grew colder as the woman and the child approached, a biting wind cutting through their cloaks. The ridge was infamous, a place whispered about in fear, where only the desperate dared to tread. But for the woman, desperation was a familiar companion. "We'll need help to cross this," she muttered, her gaze fixed on the ominous terrain ahead. The child glanced up at her. "Help? From who?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she led them toward a narrow path that veered away from the main route. She had heard rumors during their time in the refugee camp, whispers of an underground network that operated in the shadows, trading information and favors for a price. If anyone knew how to navigate the Black Ridge, it would be them. They found the entrance to the smuggler's den hidden beneath a cluster of boulders. A narrow tunnel descended into the earth, the faint glow of lanterns illuminating the path. The woman hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the child's shoulder. "Stay close," she said firmly. "And don't speak unless I say it's safe." The child nodded, clutching the dog tag around her neck for comfort. The tunnel opened into a sprawling cavern, its walls lined with makeshift stalls and bustling with activity. Humans and aliens alike moved through the space, their faces shadowed and wary. The air was thick with the scent of oil, smoke, and desperation. The woman kept her hood low, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She spotted a figure sitting at a corner table, surrounded by maps and tools. The alien's features were reptilian, his scales catching the dim light. She recognized him as a smuggler known for his knowledge of the Black Ridge. She approached cautiously, the child trailing behind her. The smuggler looked up as they neared, his yellow eyes narrowing. Well, he drawled, his voice a low guess. "What brings a wanderer like you to my table?" "I need a guide," the woman said, her tone direct. "Someone who can get me through the Black Ridge." The smuggler leaned back, a toothy grin spreading across his face. "And what makes you think I'd be willing to help you?" She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small pouch, placing it on the table. The smuggler opened it, his grin widening as he inspected the contents. Precious metals and rare crystals, scavenged during her travels. "This will cover your fee," she said, "and I'm willing to offer more if you can get us across safely." The smuggler's eyes flicked to the child, who was clutching the dog tag nervously. "The Black Ridge isn't just dangerous," he said, his tone shifting. "It's deadly, and the two of you don't exactly look equipped for what's out there." "I faced worse," the woman replied evenly. "We can handle it." The smuggler regarded her for a moment before leaning forward. "There's more to this than you're letting on," he said. "Why risk your lives for this journey?" The woman hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "I'm looking for someone, a human who might be on the other side." The smuggler's grin faded. "You're chasing a ghost," he said. "Most who go into the Black Ridge never come out, and if this human you're looking for went there, it's likely they didn't make it." "I'll take that chance," the woman said, her voice unwavering. The smuggler studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right," he said. "I'll guide you. But understand this, I'm not responsible for what happens to you out there. If things go south, you're on your own." "Agreed," the woman said. The deal was struck, and preparations began. The smuggler provided them with supplies, maps, climbing gear, and thermal cloaks to protect against the ridge's freezing temperatures. He also shared warnings about the dangers they would face: treacherous terrain, hostile wildlife, and ancient war machines that still roamed the area, their programming corrupted over time. As they set out, the child looked up at the woman. "Do you trust him?" she whispered. "No," the woman admitted, "but we don't have a choice." The journey through the Black Ridge was as perilous as the smuggler had warned. The path was narrow and steep, with sheer cliffs on either side. The wind howled through the peaks, carrying with it a bone-chilling cold. At night, they huddled around a small fire, the smuggler telling grim tales of those who had tried and failed to cross the ridge. Despite his rough demeanor, the smuggler proved to be a skilled guide. He navigated the treacherous terrain with ease, his knowledge of the ridge's hidden paths invaluable. But the woman remained vigilant, always aware of the possibility that he might turn on them. The turning point came on the third night, when they stumbled upon the remains of an old outpost. The structure was crumbling, its walls covered in frost and moss. Inside, they found evidence of a battle: scorch marks, broken weapons, and bloodstains frozen into the ground. "This place gives me the creeps," the smuggler muttered, his eyes darting around the room. "We shouldn't stay here long." As they searched the outpost, the woman found something that made her heart stop: a piece of fabric, torn from a human uniform. It was old and weathered, but she recognized the insignia. It was the same as the one on the dog tag. "He was here," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she held the fabric. The smuggler glanced at it, his expression darkening. If he was here, it doesn't mean he made it out. The woman's grip on the fabric tightened. Then we'll find out what happened to him, she said, her voice filled with determination. No matter what. The smuggler sighed but didn't argue. They left the outpost and continued their journey, the stakes higher than ever. The ridge seemed to grow darker and more menacing with each step, but the woman's resolve burned brighter. She would find the man who had saved her, no matter the cost, and she would face whatever dangers lay ahead to do so. The human's legacy. The black ridge stretched behind them like a monstrous shadow, but the path ahead was no less treacherous. The woman, the child, and their reluctant guide stood at the edge of a mist-filled valley, its eerie stillness unsettling. The smuggler muttered under his breath, clearly unnerved by the atmosphere. "This is it," he said, gesturing toward the valley, "the place they call the Silent Grave." The woman frowned. "Why is it called that?" "Because it swallows everything," the smuggler replied. "Voices, sounds, people. Those who enter rarely come out. If your human made it past here, he must have been something extraordinary." The child clutched the woman's hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. "Do you think he's still alive?" she asked softly. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt to the child's level, her sharp features softening. "I don't know," she admitted. "But even if he's gone, we'll find something of him. Something that shows he was here." The smuggler snorted. "Sentimental nonsense," he muttered, though he didn't object as they began their descent into the valley. The silent grave lived up to its name. The mist was thick, clinging to their skin and muffling every sound. Even their footsteps seemed to vanish into the fog. The woman's senses were on high alert, her keen eyes scanning for danger. The smuggler, despite his earlier bravado, kept a nervous hand on his weapon. They hadn't gone far when they found the first sign of the human's presence, a battered helmet, half buried in the mud. The child spotted it first, her sharp cry breaking the oppressive silence. "Look!" she exclaimed, running to pick it up. The woman examined the helmet carefully. The insignia on its side matched the one on the dog tag. Her chest tightened. "He was here," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The smuggler crouched beside her, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "This helmet's been here a long time," he said. "Could mean he died here, like the others." The woman shook her head. "Or it means he fought to survive." They continued deeper into the valley, finding more traces of the past, shattered weapons, burned-out drones, and crumbling walls that hinted at an ancient battlefield. The remnants painted a picture of a desperate struggle, a battle where one man had faced impossible odds. Then they found the journal. It was hidden in a hollowed-out rock, protected from the elements. The leather cover was worn, the pages brittle but intact. The woman opened it carefully, her hands trembling. The words inside were written in neat, deliberate handwriting, human handwriting. The child peered over her shoulder, her eyes wide. "What does it say?" she asked. The woman began to read aloud, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Day 14. Supplies are running low, and the drones are closing in. But I can't leave this valley. Not yet. There's too much at stake. Day 22. I found shelter in an old bunker. It's not much, but it'll do. The ridge was worse than I expected, but I made it. If anyone finds this, know that I tried. I tried to make it right. The journal was filled with similar entries, accounts of survival, of guilt, of hope. The human had come to the silent grave for a reason, but his words didn't reveal why. Only in the final entry did the truth begin to emerge. Day 30. I think I've found it. The artifact. It's here. If I can get it out, maybe it'll mean something. Maybe it'll help. But I don't know if I have the strength to go on. The woman's breath caught in her throat. An artifact, she murmured. He wasn't just running. He was searching for something. The smuggler's interest was piqued. Artifact. He echoed, his tone shifting. What kind of artifact? The woman ignored him, her mind racing. The human sacrifice, his journey through the ridge, it had all been for a purpose. But what had he found? And why had it been so important? The child tugged at her sleeve. "Do you think it's still here?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Maybe," the woman said. "And if it is, we'll find it." The smuggler looked uneasy. "Artifacts like that don't just sit around," he warned. "If it's still here, it's probably guarded. And whatever's guarding it won't be friendly." The woman stood, her resolve unshaken. "Then we'll deal with it," she said, "just like we've dealt with everything else." They pressed on, the journal now their guide. The entries led them to a hidden path, barely visible through the mist. The woman's heart pounded as they followed it, each step bringing them closer to the truth. At last, they reached the center of the valley, a massive, ancient structure half buried in the earth. Its walls were covered in strange markings, glowing faintly in the dim light. The air was heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of the woman's neck stand on end. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where he was." The smuggler's eyes darted nervously around the structure. "I don't like this," he muttered. "We should leave." But the woman wasn't listening. She stepped forward, her hand brushing against the glowing markings. The structure seemed to respond to her touch, a low hum filling the air. "Whatever he found," she said, her voice steady, "it's here. And we're going to finish what he started." The child stood beside her, her small hand clutching the dog tag tightly. The smuggler hesitated, torn between his fear and his curiosity. Together, they prepared to uncover the human's legacy, unaware of the dangers that awaited them inside. A living memory. The ancient structure stood like a sentinel in the mist, its towering walls etched with alien symbols that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. The woman, the child, and the smuggler approached cautiously, the air around them heavy with an unexplainable energy. Each step felt weighted, as if the ground itself was warning them to turn back. The child tugged on the woman's cloak, her small voice trembling. "Do you think he's inside?" The woman nodded, her gaze fixed on the massive doorway before them. "If he found something, it would be here. Stay close to me." The smuggler hesitated at the threshold, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he studied the glowing symbols. "This place is ancient," he muttered. "Older than the war. Older than either of our species. Whatever your human was looking for, it might not have been meant for him, or us." Ignoring his warning, the woman stepped forward. The doorway seemed to sense her presence, a low hum resonating through the structure. The symbols along the walls began to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns that pulsed rhythmically. With a deep rumble, the massive doors parted, revealing a dark corridor within. The air inside was cold and still, carrying the faint scent of something metallic and ancient. The child's small hand slipped into the woman's, her grip firm despite her fear. The smuggler followed reluctantly, his weapon drawn, and his movements cautious. As they ventured deeper into the structure, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, their glowing lines forming constellations that seemed to move and shift as they watched. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it rested an object that radiated an intense, pulsating light. The woman's breath caught in her throat. "The artifact," she whispered. The child stepped closer, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is it?" she asked. The woman shook her head. She didn't know. The object was unlike anything she had ever seen, an oblong sphere, its surface smooth yet constantly shifting as if alive. The light it emitted was mesmerizing, casting long, dancing shadows across the chamber. The smuggler's voice broke through her thoughts. This is what he was after." He took a cautious step forward, his greed barely masked. "Do you have any idea what this is worth?" "It's not about worth," the woman said sharply. "He believed it was important. That's why he risked everything to find it." The smuggler sneered. Important to who? Him. You don't even know what it does. Before she could respond, a faint noise echoed through the chamber, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, and the light from the artifact grew brighter, filling the room with an intense glow. Something's happening, the child said, clutching the dog tag around her neck. The woman instinctively stepped in front of the child, her hand on the hilt of her blade. The artifact began to levitate, rising slowly from the pedestal. The carvings on the walls pulsed in sync with its light, the constellations shifting to form a new intricate pattern. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light dimmed. The chamber fell silent once more, but the air was thick with a presence, something unseen but undeniably there. From the shadows, a faint figure emerged. At first, it was barely more than a shimmer, but as it stepped closer, it solidified into a recognizable form. It was a human man, his features weathered but familiar. The woman's heart skipped a beat. "Carter," she whispered. The figure looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "You came," he said, his voice echoing faintly as if carried on the wind. The child gasped, her small hand tightening around the dog tag. "Is it really him?" The smuggler took a step back, his reptilian eyes wide with disbelief. "How is this possible? He should be gone." Carter finished, a wry smile on his face. "I thought so too. But this place, it kept me alive. Or something like it." The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving him. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Carter gestured toward the artifact, which now hovered silently above the pedestal. "I found it," he said. "Or maybe it found me. It's not just an artifact. It's alive. And it's connected to everything." "Connected?" The woman echoed, confusion and awe mingling in her voice. "It holds memories," Carter explained. "Not just mine, but countless others. It's a living archive, storing the knowledge and experiences of those who came before us. That's why I stayed. To protect it. To make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands." The smuggler scoffed. "And what makes you think you can control something like that?" "I can't," Carter admitted. "But I can guide it. It's searching for something. Someone who can understand it. Someone who can use it to bring unity, not destruction." The woman's gaze shifted to the artifact, its light now soft and steady. She felt a strange pull toward it, as if it was calling to her. "And you think I'm that person?" she asked. Carter smiled faintly. "I don't think it's a coincidence that you're here." The child stepped forward, her small frame dwarfed by the artifact's presence. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Carter knelt beside her, his expression gentle. "Now," he said, "we decide what kind of future we want to create. Together." The chamber grew silent again, the weight of his words settling over them. The woman looked at Carter, then at the artifact. She knew their journey wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. The emotional reunion. The chamber was still, the artifact's soft light casting a warm glow over the scene. The woman, standing just a few steps away from Carter, struggled to believe what her eyes were seeing. He was here, alive, or something close to it. The years of searching, the trials, and the sacrifices all led to this moment. The child clung to her side, her wide eyes fixed on Carter. "He's real," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make him vanish. The smuggler, standing cautiously at the edge of the room, broke the silence. "This is touching and all, but we're in a place that could kill us at any moment. Maybe we save the reunions for when we're not in a glowing death trap." The woman shot him a glare before turning back to Carter. "I thought you were gone," she said, her voice breaking. "All this time, I thought I was chasing a ghost." Carter smiled faintly. "I almost was. This place, it's not just a repository for memories. It's alive, and it keeps those who connect with it in ways I still don't fully understand. I'm not the same as I was, but I'm here." The woman's eyes glistened with unused tears. "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you come back?" He gestured toward the artifact. "Because of this. It's more than just a tool or a relic. It's a bridge, something that could unite our species. I couldn't risk it falling into the wrong hands." The smuggler let out a low whistle. "You're telling me that thing can stop wars? That's a big claim." Carter's expression grew serious. "It's not just about stopping wars. It's about understanding, about sharing the experiences, thoughts, and emotions of countless beings. Imagine if people could truly see through each other's eyes, feel what others feel. There'd be no room for hatred or fear." The woman stared at the artifact, its glow steady and calming. "You stayed to protect it," she said. "But why me? Why did it bring me here?" Carter stepped closer, his gaze soft but steady. "You've already proven that you see beyond the barriers of species and war. You cared for a child that wasn't your own. You crossed the Black Ridge, risking everything. The artifact recognizes that. It needs someone like you, someone who can guide its purpose." The woman shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You are," Carter said firmly. "You always have been." The child stepped forward, holding out the dog tag. "This is yours," she said, her small voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Carter took the dog tag with a reverence that belied its simplicity. "You've kept it all this time," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "She kept it to find you," the child said. "And now we're here." Carter knelt down to the child's level, his expression softening. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you." The moment was interrupted by a sudden tremor. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and the walls of the chamber began to pulse with light. The artifact's glow intensified, its energy filling the air with a hum that grew louder with each passing second. "What's happening?" the woman asked, alarmed. "The artifact is activating," Carter said. "It must have sensed your presence, your potential. It's choosing you." The woman's heart raced. "Choosing me for what?" "To carry its purpose," Carter replied. "To take its knowledge and use it to unite our people." The smuggler, who had been silently inching toward the exit, looked back at them with wide eyes. "This sounds like a lot of responsibility. Maybe we should reconsider." The artifact pulsed again, brighter this time, silencing him. The woman stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for it. The moment her fingers touched its surface, a surge of energy coursed through her, flooding her mind with images, emotions, and memories, not just her own, but countless others. She saw the pain of war, the joy of peace, and the hope of a future where such suffering was no longer necessary. The artifact's light dimmed as she pulled her hand away, her breathing ragged. Carter steadied her, his touch grounding her amidst the storm of emotions. "What did it show you?" he asked gently. "Everything," she whispered. "It showed me everything." The artifact floated back to the pedestal, its glow soft and steady once more. The chamber grew silent, the tremors subsiding. The woman turned to Carter, her resolve clear. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll take this responsibility." Carter's expression was one of pride and relief. "I knew you would." The smuggler sighed dramatically. "Great. So what now? Do we all hold hands and sing about peace?" The woman ignored his sarcasm, her gaze fixed on Carter. "What about you? Will you come with us?" Carter hesitated, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "I can't leave this place. My connection to the artifact is too strong. If I go, it could destabilize everything." The woman's chest tightened. "But we just found you." Carter smiled softly. "And now you know where I am. This isn't goodbye. Not really. I'll always be here." The child ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Promise we'll see you again," she said, her voice muffled against him. "I promise," he said, his voice steady. "And when you come back, I'll be here." The woman nodded, her tears falling silently. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Carter stepped back, his figure fading slightly as the artifact's light enveloped him. "Go," he said. "The world needs you now." The woman took the child's hand, her steps steady as they left the chamber. The smuggler followed, grumbling under his breath, but not daring to leave their side. As they emerged from the structure into the cold air of the Black Ridge, the woman looked back, her heart heavy yet full. Carter was alive, and his legacy was now hers to carry. And as they began the journey back, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.